The second bone that I have to pick with Miss Princess Weeks here about her argument that Heathcliff from Wuthering Heights was likely black or black mixed race. Um, and again, she and many other people they just think it's a tragedy that in the most recent movie adaptation of Wuthering Heights, they cast a white guy, Jacob Elordi, right here, as Heathcliff, when Heathcliff was described in the book as being dark-skinned. So I am not going to play any part of her video because I don't want her claiming copyright infraction or anything like that. What I am going to do is quickly give you a recap summary of a big part of her argument for why Heathcliff was likely black and why it's such an insult that he was played by a white guy. So what she says is that, first of all, Mr. Earnshaw in the book, he found Heathcliff starving on the streets of Liverpool. Now that's true. So Heathcliff was described as being a little starving, disheveled, dirty boy living on the streets of Liverpool when Mr. Earnshaw found him and took him home. And the other thing that she goes on and on about is that Liverpool was a huge slaving city. Now, this is true, very true. In the 18th century, Liverpool had even surpassed London for its slaving practices. So it was full of white slave owners, slave merchants, and they were bringing black people that they captured in Africa. They were bringing them up from the European colonies and selling them on the streets of the major cities in England as slaves. So the facts that she's presenting are correct. What's not correct is her interpretation of those facts. What she's not considering is the value of a slave. Think about that for a minute. So I found this little article here, and it's talking about what black slaves were bought and sold for back in the 18th century in England. You can see here, there's like a little picture of a recording of, what some slaves were bought and sold for. So you can see here, one man was 47 years old. His valuation was 130 pounds. Another man was 50 years old. His valuation was 100 pounds. Down here, there was another one, Dick, 25, sold for 140 pounds. Castile, 45, sold for 60 pounds. The total valuation for 54 male and female slaves came to 5,100 pounds, a sum equal to around 500,000 pounds today. So it looks like most slaves were selling for an average of like 100 pounds. Do you know what 100 pounds was worth back in the 18th century? Like what it would be worth today? $20,000. $20,000 they were paying per slave, roughly around 20,000 bucks. So black slaves, and there were only about 10 to 20,000 black people in England in the late 18th century total, right? They probably weren't hard to keep track of considering they were such a small portion of the population. There were 9 million people, white people in England, and of the 9 million people, there were only about 20,000 black people. So it was probably easy to keep track of them. And they would have had a lot of incentive to do so because black slaves would have been considered very valuable property. Think on that. Chew on that for a minute. So you're trying to tell me, ma'am, Miss Princess Weeks, that a little black boy or a little black mixed race boy who likely would have had strong black features, you're trying to convince me and your viewers of the fact that he was just wandering around Liverpool in the 18th century in front of all these white slave owners, $20,000 just walking around in front of them, clearly not owned because he was disheveled, dirty, and starving, living on the streets. And you're trying to convince me that none of those white slave owners thought that maybe they should grab him and sell him for a quick 20,000 bucks. That hasn't occurred to you? Like it didn't occur to any of the white slave owners to grab the little black boy and sell him because most of the black people in England at the time were slaves? Really? The other thing that doesn't make sense is, he's described as speaking, Heathcliff is described as speaking gibberish. So he was either not born in England or he was born into a community in England that did not speak English. They spoke another language, like maybe the Romany people, because the Romany people, they speak Romany. Let's see. Yeah, so he supposedly spoke a language that sounded like gibberish. And the Romany speak a language that is like Indo, I think it's like Indic and Sanskrit based. So it probably sounded a lot like gibberish to the native English speaking Brits. Don't you think? It would make more sense for him to have been born into a Romani community where they spoke this whole other language. And by the way, it's also well established that there were Romani people, Romani communities that like in and all around Liverpool. Why does that make more sense than him coming from another country? Well, because again, if he spoke a different language and came from another country, then it would suggest that maybe he was black and he was brought from Africa to be a slave. So then he would have been sold straight off the boat. You understand? Like if he was brought over from Africa, a little black boy speaking another language, he would have been sold straight into slavery, straight off the boat. Yeah. Another thing you need to consider is what happened to runaways? So, it didn't bring up the same results, and I don't feel like reading those results to find the specific information that I want to show you. But the runaways, the way white slave masters dealt with runaways is they posted wanted notices all over the place in newspapers all over the city saying, here's my I lost a slave, they ran away, I'll give you a reward if you return them. Or they would kidnap their slave back. If the slave ran away and got themselves established freely somewhere in another community, another city, a town, they were found, the white slave owner would just kidnap them and take them back. So the white slave owners were very controlling and covetous of their black slaves. The black slaves were worth a lot of money to them. So again, I find it hard to believe that a little black boy was wandering around the streets of Liverpool in front of a bunch of white slave owners, and they were just taking no notice of him, and none of them were thinking, you know what, I think I'm going to get myself a free slave here, and either put him to work or sell him for a quick $20,000, £100 back then. That does not make sense. It makes more sense that he was Romani. And as I mentioned, the Romani people are Indo-Aryan. They're Indo-Aryan because they originated in northern India. I think it mentions it here. They originated in northern India. You know when they came over to Europe? Between the 8th century and the 10th century. So like the 700s AD to the 900s AD. Yeah. That's over 1,000 years ago. That was even over about 1,000 years, that even back in the 18th century, they had been in Europe for 1,000 years. Which means their Indian genetics had been mixing with European Caucasian genetics for a millennia. Over a millennia. At what point do you think their Indian genetics were watered down to the point where they're just Caucasian? And they are. Indo-Aryans are considered to be Caucasian. And they manifest sometimes very European appearances, very white European appearances, but sometimes they also manifest darker, more Indian appearance because they have both genetics. The other thing that could have happened to Heathcliff, one of the reasons why he was probably abandoned and starving orphan child on the streets, is something that was going on with the Romanis back during the 18th century in England. Is some of them sometimes were being rounded up and deported out of England. So it's very probable that Heathcliff's family, parents, were rounded up and deported out of England, and he was left behind. But he probably looked white Caucasian enough to not be rounded up with the rest of them, because I guarantee you, if they were rounding up Romani people, they were probably rounding up the ones that looked more Indian than European Caucasian. Those were the ones they were probably deporting out, the ones that looked more Indian. So if he got left behind, if he wasn't Indian looking enough to be deported with a lot of the other Romani people, then again, he was probably fairly white Caucasian looking, enough for people to leave him be. Again, I'm sure he was darker skinned than most of the porcelain skinned, blonde haired, blue eyed English people, which is why they would have called him dark skinned. But I doubt very much that he was black, because if he was black, he would have been enslaved. Before Mr. Earnshaw ever found him, he would not have been living for weeks and weeks on the streets of Liverpool and not have been captured and enslaved by one of the white slave owners. And he probably wouldn't have gone anywhere near Mr. Earnshaw, because Mr. Earnshaw was white. He wouldn't have understood the language, the English language, because he just spoke some other language that they thought was gibberish. So he probably wouldn't have trusted Mr. Earnshaw and would have thought, you're probably just another white master slave owner trying to capture me, get away from me. He would have run off. Like, why would he have gone anywhere near Mr. Earnshaw if he was black? And again, like, I doubt that would even matter. I doubt he could have run very far for very long. They would have captured him, and they would have sold him, and he would have been put to work if he looked black enough. That's just the way it was back then, especially in Liverpool, like the capital of slavery in England. More likely, he was a Romani with darker skin than average for, white Caucasian, but still had white Caucasian enough features that he was not rounded up and deported with the other Romanis, and that he was left behind and or abandoned for some reason and left to fend for himself on the streets of Liverpool. So yeah, like, your argument, you're given the facts. The facts seem correct, but you are not interpreting them in a realistic manner. So, and by the way, that apology is not going to be forthcoming. So I did go back and look at her. I said in my last video that she looked like someone who probably would never really address the Epstein files, like something of substance. And I said I would apologize if I found anything like that in her YouTube channel videos. I went back and looked at some of her YouTube channel videos. I don't see anything like the Epstein files, or it's all shallow bullshit that doesn't matter. It's all similar stuff, like commenting on movies and books and race and whitewashing type stuff. So, yeah, there will be no apology today. And in case you haven't figured it out yet, the only reason that I would broach this topic at all is to piggyback off of your subscribers and your viewers and get them coming to my channel and looking at the videos I've just recently posted about the Epstein files and the cult of people that I've been researching for a few years who I think traffic in children, because one of their names was just recently found in the Epstein files. Because that is infinitely more important than the whole, oh my gosh, they cast a white man to play Heathcliff in Wuthering Heights. It's a tragedy. No, Biachi, I'm sorry, but You know what's a tragedy? Children being raped. Children being trafficked by major politicians, big business owners, the millionaires and billionaires of the world, the lawmakers. Children being bred just so that they can be raped and trafficked and experimented on. That's a freaking tragedy. You need to grow up. It's disgusting that you waste so much time on something that has so little substance. It's shameful and disappointing. And it's like, how old are you? Like, when are you going to get there? Because the rest of us, we adults who are concerned with more important things, like shutting down the network of people who were working with Epstein, we're just waiting for you children to get on board. Like, come on. We know you can get there. Come on, dudes. We need help with this. This is a tall order. We need more adults on board. Come on. So, yeah, I'm going to leave it there. That's absolutely the only reason why any of this is worth talking about, is to open the door to get people maybe looking at more important topics of discussion, rather than like, oh my gosh, race bending in Interview with the Vampire, whitewashing in Wuthering Heights. It's just so tragic. It's so insulting. Oh my God. Disgusting. All right. I'm going to leave it there.